I thought going to my ex's engagement party was a terrible idea until his daughter stepped up and exposed everything. If I'm being honest, I almost didn't go. In fact, I sat in my car for a full 17 minutes in the parking lot of the Bellevue Yacht Club, staring at the embossed invitation in my lap and listening to my own heartbeat. It was that kind of anxious thump you feel in your throat more than your chest, the kind that whispers, "This is a mistake." And maybe it was. What kind of woman walks into her ex's engagement party uninvited, not as a guest, but as a ghost of everything he ran from? What kind of woman volunteers to become a living reminder of a story he tried to erase? Apparently, me. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Cream envelope. Gold lettering. No return address. Just my name, Lauren Carter, scripted in ink so delicate, it made me feel like I'd been handpicked to suffer. It wasn't just a party. It was a performance. A showcase of how far he'd come. How happy he was. How beautifully I'd been replaced. And God help me, I wasn't ready. Daniel and I hadn't spoken in 10 years, not since the night he walked out, 2 weeks after I lost our child. No warning. No explanation. Just a duffel bag, a note on the kitchen counter, and silence that stretched for years. But what haunted me wasn't that he left. It was who he left behind with me. Nina. She wasn't mine by blood. She was his, barely 9 years old, left in my arms when her biological mother dropped her off like a forgotten handbag and vanished. Daniel brought her into our lives, and when he disappeared, he left her in mine. I didn't become a mother by choice. I became one because someone had to stay. So I did. I stayed through eviction notices and power shutoffs. Through nights when Nina cried herself to sleep asking why her father didn't call. Through mornings when I wrote job applications while packing her lunch and braiding her hair with trembling hands. Through birthdays spent making dollar store cakes look magical and Christmases with hand-sewn stockings because we couldn't afford them all. I stayed. And now, a decade later, I was being invited to watch that same man toast a new beginning with a woman who looked like she'd never cried over anything more serious than chipped gel nails. My daughter, yes, I call her that, Nina, found the invitation first. She was the one who placed it back on the table after I'd crumpled it into the trash. She smoothed it out with those long, graceful fingers of hers and said, "You should go." I laughed. Bitter, sharp, defensive. For what? I asked. So I can clap when he brags about finally finding someone who isn't too emotional or too complicated? She didn't flinch. Just looked at me with that terrifying wisdom kids like her develop when life forgets to protect them. No, she said. So he can see what he lost. I remember the way she stood then, hands on her hips, chin raised, as if daring me to shrink back into the version of myself I used to be. The version that bent over backward for love that didn't bend back. That's when I realized this wasn't about Daniel. It was about me. It was about showing up, not for him, but for the woman who survived him. So I went. I wore navy. Not black, not red. Nothing that screamed vengeance or look at me now. Just navy. Classy. Quiet. Resolute. The kind of color that says, I didn't come to beg or boast. I came to exist. And that should have been enough. The Bellevue was absurd in its elegance. Chandeliers like glass constellations. Velvet drapes so thick you could mistake them for theater curtains. Guests sipped cocktails from crystal, their laughter bouncing off marble walls like echoes in a museum. I stepped inside and instantly felt underdressed in every way that mattered. Daniel didn't see me at first. Neither did Madison. But others did. There's something strange about walking into a room where you're known but not welcomed. Eyes flick over you like you're a glitch in the simulation, recognizable but out of place. Some stared longer than they should have. Some whispered. I kept walking. I found my seat in the back. Far from the centerpieces, but close enough to the bar in case I needed to disappear behind a glass of wine. I had rehearsed my emotional armor for weeks, the frozen smile, the casual nods, the internal monologue reminding me that I was whole without him. Then, I saw her, Nina. In uniform. Black apron. Hair pulled back in a bun she never liked wearing. She was working the event. Said it was just another shift. Swore it had nothing to do with me. But I knew better. That girl has always had the fiercest kind of loyalty. Quiet. Watchful. Steady like a lighthouse that never stops turning, even when the waves ignore it. She caught my eye as she passed with a tray of oysters. Didn't say a word. Just winked. I'm here, it said. And I believed her. Everything about the night was curated to scream, look at how perfect we are. The speeches began with Daniel's law partner gushing about rebirth and second chances. Madison's maid of honor waxed poetic about how Daniel was finally with someone who sees his worth. It was fine. I was prepared. Until Madison took the mic. She didn't even wait for the MC. Just tapped her flute, turned toward the room, and smiled like a woman about to deliver the punchline of her life. Before I met Daniel, she began, he was lost. Damaged. Stuck with someone who didn't know how to love him right. My heart stuttered. But I healed him. I gave him purpose. I saved him from that broken woman. She didn't have to point. Her eyes did the work. Laughter. Actual, human laughter. People toasted. A few even clapped. And all I could think was, you don't know what I gave up to keep that man breathing. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't let the tears waiting behind my lashes have the satisfaction of falling. Because I didn't come to break. But then, something happened. A shift. A silence. And a girl walking toward the mic. She wore black. White shirt. Apron. Hat in hand. And when she reached the front of the room, she looked straight at Madison and said, loud enough to make the violinist stop mid-note. I'm his daughter. And I have something to say. The room shattered. Not with noise, but with stillness. And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't come to that party to find closure. I had come to witness truth finally find its voice. And my daughter, my brave, broken-hearted, unshakable girl, was about to speak it. It arrived on a Wednesday. I remember because I had just come back from the laundromat, my arms full of clothes that smelled like detergent and disappointment. Bills were piled on the kitchen counter, unopened. A microwave dinner was spinning behind me, humming like an unwanted guest. And right there, resting neatly among the chaos, was the envelope. Cream-colored. Thick. The kind of paper that whispers money. Class. Power. There was no return address. Just my name. Lauren Carter. Written in calligraphy so pristine, it felt personal, like someone took their time making sure I couldn't pretend it was a mistake. I held it like it might explode. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I let it sit on the counter for 2 days. Every time I passed it, it called to me like a ticking clock. I thought about throwing it away. More than once, my hand hovered over the trash can lid. But curiosity is cruel. It doesn't whisper. It nags. When I finally opened it, I wish I could say I was shocked. You are cordially invited to a celebration honoring Daniel Rhodes' retirement and engagement. I read it again. And again. Like maybe the words would morph into something that made sense. Daniel Rhodes. The man who vanished after 8 years, 2 shared leases, a lost child, and 1 small human being who needed him. I stared at the invitation until my vision blurred. Then I laughed. It was a sound I didn't recognize at first, dry, sharp, almost feral. He was retiring. Getting engaged. Sending out invitations like nothing ever happened. Like I was a page he'd torn out of his life and tossed aside. Like Nina never sat up all night waiting for calls that didn't come. Like I didn't lose more than a partner, I lost my entire sense of direction. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor with a bottle of red wine and unfolded that same invitation 14 times. I studied the lettering. The layout. The way my name was centered like I belonged on the guest list. But I didn't. Not really. I was the scar in his story he didn't want to talk about. He didn't just abandon me. He ghosted his daughter. A child. A child who wasn't even mine by blood, but one who clung to me like I was the only raft in her storm. And I was. I was the one who taught her to tie her shoes, to braid her hair, to pack a lunch that wouldn't embarrass her in front of other kids. I was the one who stayed when he didn't even bother to explain why he left. In the first year, I used to think maybe he'd died. I know that sounds dramatic, but sometimes it's easier to believe someone is dead than accept they just didn't care enough to call. Every time I checked the mailbox, I hoped for something, anything. A letter. A check. An apology. A sign that he remembered we existed. Nothing ever came. Except bills. And silence. Nina never asked why. Not directly. But the questions showed up in other ways. Like when she asked if her father had ever really loved her. Or when she made me pinky promise I would never leave like everyone else. Or the time I found her crying over a Father's Day craft she made at school and threw in the trash before I got home. I tried to protect her from the gaping hole he left behind. I filled it with routines. With love. With late-night pancakes and early morning bus stops and every ounce of emotional glue I had left in my body. But the truth? I was broken too. I hid it well. Smiled when I needed to. Laughed when people checked in. But there were nights, God, there were nights, when I would sit in the bathroom with the door locked and cry into a towel so she wouldn't hear me. Some nights I'd clutch her old baby blanket and whisper promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I'm still here. I won't leave. I'll make it better. And I did, eventually. But not all at once. It took years. Years of therapy I could barely afford. Years of self-help books that told me to reclaim my narrative while I worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Years of swallowing my own pride so Nina could have school supplies and secondhand ballet shoes. But slowly, I did it. I rebuilt. I became the version of me I used to envy. Independent. Resilient. Capable. Not always confident. Not always happy. But standing. And Nina? She blossomed. She was fire and wind and ocean rolled into one. Sarcastic. Brilliant. Kind in a way that made people uncomfortable. And fiercely, quietly protective of me. So when she walked into the kitchen and saw the invitation on the table, I expected her to scoff. Maybe tear it in half. Instead, she picked it up like it was sacred. Are you going? She asked, her voice casual but sharp beneath the surface. No, I replied too quickly. Of course not. Why would I? She turned it over in her hand, studied the embossing, the golden border. Then, she looked at me, really looked at me. You should. I blinked. Excuse me? You should go, she said again. Not for him. For you. I laughed again, this time with more bitterness than breath. What exactly would that accomplish? You think he wants me there? This is a show, Nina. He's staging a performance. I'm not going to be the unwanted extra in the back row. She didn't argue. just walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter like she'd been waiting her whole life to say what came next. "You know what your problem is, Mom," she said softly. "Please," I muttered, "enlighten me. You still think you're the woman he left?" I looked up. "You're not," she said. "He left a version of you that barely knew who she was. That woman doesn't exist anymore. You're someone else now. And it's time he saw that." My breath caught in my chest. I hadn't cried in front of Nina in years. Not since the first night she called me Mom and meant it. But in that moment, I felt the tears lining up behind my eyes like soldiers waiting for permission to fall. "I don't need to prove anything to him," I whispered. "You don't," she agreed. "But maybe you need to prove something to yourself." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because the next morning, I found myself pulling out the navy dress I'd buried in the back of the closet. The one I kept saying I'd wear someday when things felt right. Someday had arrived. Nina offered to drive. I declined. But she insisted on coming anyway, said she picked up a catering shift at the event. Claimed it was easy money. Said it was just coincidence. But I knew. I knew she was coming to keep an eye on me. To stand in the wings. To be my mirror if I forgot who I'd become. And I loved her more in that moment than I ever had before. Because she didn't need to say it. I could feel it in my bones. "If you won't fight for yourself, I'll fight for you." We arrived early. The parking lot was already filling with luxury sedans and sports cars that probably cost more than our apartment. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror and adjusted my neckline. I looked like a woman who had something to say. Maybe I did. But I hadn't decided yet if I'd say it. All I knew was this. I wasn't coming as the ex. I wasn't coming as the forgotten one. I wasn't coming to beg or to compare or to compete. I was coming because I deserved to be there. Even if no one else thought so. Even if Daniel had rewritten the story. Even if I was the only one who remembered the version that never got told. I stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply. The sea breeze rolled in from the bay. It smelled like salt, secrets, and second chances. Nina walked beside me, her apron tied tight, clipboard in hand. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. And we walked inside. Together. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the sea breeze or the salt air wafting in from the marina, but the scent of money. That impossible-to-fake fragrance of white roses, designer perfume, polished wood floors, and champagne chilled in silver buckets that cost more than my monthly rent. The Bellevue Yacht Club was like something out of a magazine. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff gliding silently in perfect black and white, everything meticulously designed to whisper, "Perfection lives here." I walked in slowly, carefully, the way you walk into a church when you haven't prayed in years. As if I didn't belong, but was willing to pretend. No one greeted me. No one asked if I was on the list. They didn't have to. I wasn't a guest. I was a ghost. A quiet shadow that everyone hoped would stay in the corner. And I did. I slipped toward the back, avoiding eye contact, my heels clicking against the marble just enough to remind me I existed. I caught glimpses of people turning, lips whispering behind champagne flutes, polite smirks masked as curiosity. I found a seat behind a floral arrangement large enough to hide behind and sat down, folding my hands in my lap, wishing I could fold my past the same way. Nina was already in motion, her black apron wrapped tightly around her waist, hair pulled into a neat bun, tray in hand, weaving through the crowd like she had done this 1,000 times. She didn't look at me. Didn't need to. Just passed close enough to brush my shoulder as if to say, "I'm here. I see you." I watched her disappear into the kitchen, swallowed up by swinging doors and the unspoken understanding that she wasn't just there to serve hors d'oeuvres. She was there to protect me. I scanned the room, and there he was, Daniel. Standing near the bar, whiskey in hand, laughing too loudly at a story told by a man in a monogrammed blazer. His hair was slightly grayer, but otherwise, he looked the same. Broad shoulders. Crooked smile. That polished charm that used to make strangers feel like they'd known him for years. It made me feel nauseous. He looked happy. Or maybe just well-rehearsed. He had a talent for that, wearing confidence like a tailored suit. I used to believe it meant something. That it meant us. That it meant truth. Now, I saw it for what it was, armor. Then I saw her. Madison. She floated through the room like she was born to be photographed. All sleek blonde waves, diamonds that glittered every time she laughed, and a figure-hugging white silk dress that screamed bridal without needing a veil. Her laugh was a little too sharp. Her touch on Daniel's arm lingered a little too long. And the way she leaned in when people complimented her ring, well, that wasn't love. That was performance. Everything about this event was staged like a Broadway show, and I was the only one who hadn't auditioned for a part. They made their way toward the head table. Applause followed. Phones were raised. Someone in a sparkly gown began to record. And just like that, the speeches began. The best man stood first. Tall, tanned, the type of man who referred to his golf swing as therapy. He made jokes about Daniel's workaholism, toasted to fresh starts, and made sure to drop phrases like legacy and built from nothing as if reading from a LinkedIn page. People laughed. Clapped. Sipped. The maid of honor stood next. All Botox and Balenciaga. She gushed about how Madison finally found her fairy tale and how this time, it's different. There were vague mentions of past pain, healing energy, and divine timing, spiritual nonsense dressed up in influencer speak. I tuned it out. I stared at the bottom of my empty glass. Then Madison stood up. I knew it was coming. The way she tapped her glass with a perfectly manicured finger, the way she leaned into the mic like she was addressing a nation instead of a ballroom, it all screamed main character energy. Before I met Daniel, she began, her voice buttery and loud enough to command silence. My spine straightened instinctively. He was lost. The crowd responded with a soft collective sigh, as if rehearsed. Wounded, she continued. Still recovering from the damage done by someone who didn't know how to love him. My heart slammed so hard against my ribcage, I thought someone might hear it. But I fixed him, she said, smiling like it was the climax of a Hallmark movie. I saved him from the woman who almost ruined his life. Gasps. Then laughter. The kind of laughter that made my skin crawl. Daniel didn't stop her. He didn't correct her. He didn't even glance in my direction. He just smiled. Nodded. Toasted. And the crowd followed suit. They clinked glasses. They leaned in. Some whispered. And I sat there. Unseen. Unheard. Uninvited to the version of the story she had just rewritten in front of 200 people and an open bar. My fingers gripped the edge of my chair. My nails dug into the fabric. My body felt like it was vibrating, every nerve alight with memory, rage, and disbelief. That woman knew nothing about me. Nothing about the miscarriage. Nothing about the therapist bills. Nothing about the eviction notices Daniel never saw. Nothing about the daughter I raised while he played ghost. She didn't fix him. He ran away long before she showed up. And instead of building something new, he built a lie. I stood up. It wasn't dramatic. No one noticed. But I had to leave. The rage, the shame, the exhaustion, it was boiling, and I knew I had only seconds before it spilled over. I turned toward the exit, heels echoing against marble, and whispered to myself. You don't need this. You've already survived him once. But then, a flicker of movement. One of the servers broke rank. Tray down. Hat off. Nina. Walking. Slowly. Steadily. Straight toward the mic. Her eyes were locked. Her hands were shaking. But her spine, God, her spine was steel. She stepped past rows of white chairs, past curious guests, past the line between staff and spectacle. She reached the front, cap clutched in her hand, apron still tied around her waist like armor. And with the kind of voice I'd only ever heard in whispered goodnights, she said, "I'm his daughter. And I have something to say." The room fell into a kind of silence you don't usually hear outside of hospitals or courtrooms. The kind of silence that holds its breath. Madison's smile froze mid-toast, her eyes still sparkling under the chandeliers, but with panic now, not pride. The crystal flute in her hand wobbled slightly. Daniel, seated beside her, had turned pale. The half-smirk on his face vanished like smoke. And there was Nina, standing at the center of it all. Not hiding behind trays or service uniforms. Not waiting to be acknowledged. Not asking for permission. Just standing. Strong. Angry. Honest. "I'm his daughter," she repeated, louder this time. From before all of this. Every head turned. Some guests leaned in, trying to piece together the twist in real time like they were watching a reality show go off script. Others exchanged glances, wondering if this was a planned surprise, another emotional beat in a perfectly choreographed night. It wasn't. This was not part of the script. "And the woman you're mocking?" Nina continued, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "She's the reason I have a home. A future. A life." She pointed, clear, direct, at me. "That's my mom. Maybe not by blood. But in every way that matters." Gasps. Actual gasps. Someone at the front dropped a fork. Madison looked around, clearly searching for someone, anyone, to take control of the chaos. But no one moved. No one spoke. Because no one knew what to say. "Daniel Rhodes is not just the man you toasted tonight," Nina said, her voice rising. "He's also the man who walked out on his 9-year-old daughter and never came back. No warning. No calls. No birthday cards. Just gone." She turned toward her father then. Slowly. And for the first time, Daniel didn't look charming or powerful or composed. He looked small. "Do you even remember what I looked like back then?" she asked him. "What my voice sounded like?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. Nothing. "I used to tell myself maybe you had died," she said. "Because the thought that you were alive and just didn't care hurt more than imagining you weren't breathing." Someone near the bar covered their mouth. Nina's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "She didn't break you," she said, turning back to the crowd. "You broke yourself. And then you tried to pretend we didn't exist." She looked back at Madison. "And you believed him. Without question. Without looking. Without asking who he was before he became your fairy tale." Madison's mouth opened, but Nina cut her off. "Let me tell you who he was. He was a man who left behind a grieving partner after she lost their baby. A man who didn't even have the decency to say goodbye. A man who couldn't handle sadness, so he disappeared." Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ," under their breath. "She stayed," Nina said. "When everything fell apart, when the heat got shut off, when I cried at night, when we couldn't afford birthday cakes, she stayed. And she made it work. She made me who I am." I was frozen. 100 emotions warred inside me: shame, pride, love, grief, disbelief. I wanted to run. I wanted to pull Nina off the stage and tell her she didn't have to carry this. That I could bear it all, like I always had. But she wasn't doing this for me. She was doing it for herself. So no, she said, you don't get to sit there and call her broken. You don't get to rewrite the story so it makes you feel better about being his second choice. The crowd didn't move. Some were crying. Others were stunned into stillness. Madison turned to Daniel. Is this true? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just sat there, staring at his daughter like she was a stranger holding a mirror to everything he had tried to bury. Nina walked toward me. Each step echoed like a drumbeat through the hall. When she reached me, she didn't say anything. She just took my hand. My fingers wrapped around hers like they always had, since she was 9 and afraid of thunderstorms. But this time, she was the one doing the protecting. She turned back to the crowd. She didn't come here to ruin anything, she said. I asked her to come. Because I wanted her to see that she doesn't have to hide anymore. Then she looked at Madison. Her gaze didn't flinch. She doesn't need to be invited into a room to belong in it. And no one gets to erase our story to make themselves look better. The silence was deafening. And then, soft but firm, Madison muttered, "This is crazy. She's trying to ruin my wedding." Nina tilted her head. You ruined it the second you built it on lies. She turned and walked away. But not before pulling me with her. And as we walked, the crowd parted, not out of politeness, but out of stunned reverence. No one stopped us. No one dared. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice, low, broken. Nina! But she didn't turn around. Not even once. The air outside hit like a blessing. Cool. Quiet. Still spinning with the echoes of everything that just happened, but at least it didn't carry the stink of white wine and forced laughter. We didn't speak at first. Nina and I just walked, past the glowing string lights, the white folding chairs still set up for a sunset toast, the waterfront view that felt so painfully artificial now. It had drizzled earlier, and the brick path glistened under our feet like it, too, had just survived a storm. She was still holding my hand. Not like a child clinging to safety, but like a woman choosing connection. I could barely breathe. I felt cracked open, raw in ways I hadn't been in years. But beneath the adrenaline and disbelief, there was something else blooming in my chest. Pride. We'd made it out. Then we heard the door swing open behind us. Footsteps. Quick. Then slowing. Madison's voice, sharp with panic. Wait. We stopped. Not because we wanted to, but because there was something almost fragile in her tone, something that suggested this woman who had stood so tall minutes ago was now unraveling thread by thread. She came into view like a ghost trailing her own shattered fairy tale. The once flawless curls were frizzing at the ends. Her lipstick smudged. The silk gown now clung too tight, stained with the night's collapse. You can't just walk out like that, she snapped. Nina turned around slowly, one eyebrow raised. We just did. You humiliated us. Madison barked, pointing an accusatory finger that shook with rage. You hijacked everything. That wasn't your moment. No, I said, stepping forward, my voice calmer than I felt. You made it our moment when you decided to use mine as your punchline. Madison's face twitched. I didn't know he had a daughter, she said defensively. He never told me. Did you ask? Nina shot back. Or were you too busy believing the version of him that made you feel chosen? There it was. The truth sitting in the space between them like a flame neither wanted to touch. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it again. Behind her, Daniel finally appeared. Disheveled. Pale. His tie was loosened. His jacket hung from his shoulder like an afterthought. He didn't look like a man in love. He looked like a man who had just watched his own mythology collapse in public. "Nina," he said, gently now, like she was a wild animal he didn't want to spook. She didn't flinch. "Which part didn't you mean for?" she asked. "Me being born? You abandoning me? Or letting someone else raise me while you vanished?" He winced. "I thought I was protecting you," he murmured. Nina actually laughed. It was short, hollow, honest. Disappearing wasn't protection. It was cowardice. He looked at me next. The first direct eye contact since we arrived. "I was broken, Lauren. You know I was." "So was I said. But I didn't leave." That moment stretched, suspended like breath before a cry. Because we both knew that was the sentence he couldn't unhear. The sentence that split the story in two. Nina's voice broke the silence again. "You know what I used to do? I used to tell myself you were dead. Because it was easier than thinking you were alive and just didn't care." Daniel's mouth opened. But he had no words left. She stepped toward him, not to embrace, not to rage. Just close enough to be heard clearly. "I forgive you," she said. He blinked. "What?" "I forgive you," she repeated. "Not for you. For me. Because carrying your absence has been exhausting. And I'm done." He swallowed hard. His eyes were glassy. But Nina didn't reach for him. She didn't cry. She didn't cave. She turned to me and smiled, soft, quiet, grounded. "You know why I turned out okay?" she said. "Because of her." She pointed. At me. Right there, in the cool night air, with mascara streaks and shattered illusions surrounding us, she drew a straight line between the mother I had become and the woman she now was. I felt it hit somewhere deeper than pride. It was identity. It was legacy. It was truth. She made me strong, Nina added. She made me enough. Madison wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold for the first time all night. "So what now?" she asked bitterly. "You just walk away like nothing happened?" Nina tilted her head. "You wrecked your own night the moment you built it on lies," she said. "We just turned on the lights." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. We walked away. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just free. Months later, the video made its rounds. Not on news channels or tabloids, but on TikTok. On Instagram Reels. On wedding forums and family trauma support groups. Clips titled things like, "Waitress shuts down bride's speech with viral mic drop." "Ex-daughter exposes groom's hidden past at engagement party." "She didn't just serve champagne, she served justice." People messaged me. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Strangers. Women. Mothers. Daughters. Some said, "You were so brave." Others said, "That happened to me too." But the one that stayed with me read, "Thank you for saying what I never could. I've been invisible for so long." And just like that, I knew. This story didn't end at that party. It started there. I began writing again. Not just blog posts. Essays. Letters. Stories of women who stayed. Women who were left behind. Women who carried everything alone and never stopped moving forward. I submitted one to a parenting blog. It went viral. Then came the emails. The DMs. The open letters. The podcast interviews. So I launched something of my own. The Second Thread. A non-profit for women rebuilding from abandonment, divorce, emotional neglect. We host support circles, offer counseling, help women write and share their stories, literally and figuratively. It's not about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's not about shame. It's about truth. Nina helps sometimes. She's thinking about launching a podcast of her own, for daughters who felt like side characters in their own families. For girls who grew up being told to shrink themselves, stay quiet, smile politely. She told me the name she wants to use, unapologetic. I didn't cry when she told me, but I held her hand for a long time afterward. One night, in January, I was washing dishes. She sat at the counter flipping through her notebook, legs swinging like she used to do at 9. She looked up and said, casually, "You know, I used to wish my real mom had stayed." I froze. Then she added, "But now, I get it. She left because I was supposed to end up with you." I turned around, dried my hands, pulled her into the kind of hug that says, "You are always mine." In every way that counts. And I realized, sometimes the best love stories aren't romantic. They're the ones written in survival, in silence, in resilience. The ones where you love someone so fiercely that one day, they learn to love themselves the same way.